Hi, welcome, Paul. Great to see you. You're the
Good to see you too, Steve.
yeah, no, well, I'm really looking forward to this discussion because, according to LinkedIn, according to your profile, you are the self-styled retail media enthusiast, which I really, really love that. So I've got to ask you. I've got to start by asking you. How did your journey on and into retail media start, and how did it take you to where you are now, which of course is MD of sales for EMEA for Koddi. So yeah, tell us about your journey, Paul.
Where did the enthusiasm begin? Is the question, Steve Gray.
Well,
so
it's great that you still got it. So
yeah, I do, I do. Well, it's definitely an evolving space. There's lots to be enthusiastic about, and hopefully, our listeners will agree by the end of this session. I think I'm not going to go through the whole like LinkedIn profile. People can do that right in their own time, but I think there's an element at the beginning in ad technology, working for a sales house, selling display, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. But my enthusiasm for retail media, I think, began. I was in Amazon for a period of time, actually based in their Slough office, which I didn't mind because Slough has two Nando's. I don't know if you ever knew this. But there you go. So I'm full on for the Slough. So I spent some time at Amazon right at the beginning. That was when there was not even any sponsored products and there was no ROAS. So people can't believe that Amazon's media business originally was just display with clicks and impressions. So that was that was challenging. And then from there, I joined a business called Hook Logic, and Hook Logic was really the originator of sponsored products. So at one point, we were powering Walmart, Target,
yeah,
Best Buy.
acquired by Criteo, some years ago
Right.
now. But
Right, and then
basically,
so I was leading the EMEA brand sales team, and I was working with a few folks over there that I'm still good friends with today, and that exactly acquired by Criteo into a leadership position at Criteo, which was great fun. Still know a lot of those guys over there, and then since there, I spent a little bit of time in InfoSum. I know you're a fan of the loyalty and data, Steve, so I also delved into that area, and they've also recently been acquired. And now at Koddi, having lots of fun over here, which we can talk about as well.
so I'm sure you're gonna tell us about Koddi. From my point of view, it's not a company that I know hugely well. I see it as kind of like, um, uh, well, it's certainly a leader in ad tech in other sectors, but not one that right now you necessarily associate with retail. And then, of course, the issue that I could imagine Cody and anybody else wanting to come into the ad tech space in, well, not just in Europe, but certainly in Europe, faces is that, I don't know, if you take Criteo and Citrus ad, now Epsilon, have they got 90% share? Then it must be something not far off that. So you've got these two giants who are deployed more or less in just about every retailer. How how do you tackle that? How do you tackle that? So I know that's a fairly direct question, but perhaps answer that, Paul, and tell us a little bit about Cody. Tell us about what you're trying to do, and
Absolutely.
but I'm sure that will be that's really to me the key question is how do you
Yeah,
how do you
yeah. I think there's a couple of answers there. I think first of all, Cody's very much a sort of behind the scenes organization. So many of our organizations build technology on top of Cody's infrastructure. So we would say we are the top three. We're top three in terms of ad revenue flowing through the system from an ad server perspective. I mean, ad servers focusing on commerce media. So I think we have had that foundational element in commerce media for some time, plenty of expertise in that. We run one of the largest grocers in the world, again, from a behind the scenes perspective in terms of their on-site uh,
are you able to say
service.
who that is?
Probably not on this call. Again, we respect the wishes of our partners in that way. We can do some digging around perhaps, but yeah, that's so we tend
There's,
to be
there's,
behind.
there's a lot of ex Dunnhumby people who who follow this podcast and also who are active in the retail media space, and many of them have an association with a very big grocer in the US.
Okay. Okay.
Is that a sort of look no further kind of thing, or am I
I mean,
pushing
look,
you
we
further?
work with a number of partners, very, very large partners behind the scenes. And I think really, we use that term commerce media. I know this is a retail media podcast, but I think you recognize that this view of things is broadening at this point. We've built platforms for people like Grubhub, which is part of, or you used to be part of the Just Eat empire, and then also we power some of the OTAs, the online travel associations, and some of those guys, that their requirements, their needs are very different, right? As you can imagine,
Mm.
we work with Checkatrade here in the UK, and you can imagine the kind of platform for their ad business that Checkatrade need versus an OTA versus a grocer are very, very different, right? And I think
Sure.
it's that kind of flexibility that I think really goes to answer the other part of your question, which is, you could argue in that sort of out of the box approach, right? Which is what many of the kind of legacy kind of retail media ad servers approach. How's that going to work? What compromises are you going to have to make, right? If you're someone like PayPal ads, right, and you're thinking I need to build an ad business, is one of those off the shelf solutions going to be appropriate for you? And that's the big question. And then I think the other thing, just in terms of like how you can be successful, you know, these contracts come up every 2 to 3 years, right? And people who are in my position, we see a sort of cycle in that way. And, no one's satisfied with the status quo, right? All these organizations are looking at the tech they've got today and say, is this what we need at this point in our maturity? Right? Maybe it made sense those few years ago, but as we've developed further, as we've maybe built more logic on our back end about which sort of products we want to show, is our technology partner still the right one for us? So I think there's plenty of opportunities to win in market from that perspective, and yeah, we're having great fun. Let's just put it that way.
And is it a zero sum game, Paul? Is it look, you've currently got this ad tech, you're currently working with Criteo, you're currently working with Citrus Ad Epsilon, you may have built something yourself. Is it sort of, look, to put us in, we need to take somebody out, or is there something around the flexibility side of things that you mentioned that might give you another route in?
Yeah, I think the industry is beginning to recognize. You hear this word modular quite a lot, right? I sometimes think, what does that actually mean in practice? But I think what I think is, maybe I, as a retailer or a commerce platform, have put some work in and built a UI. So I'm not sure if you saw Nectar 360's new platform, Pollen. Looks very, very cool. So if someone like Nectar was thinking, you know, we also have an ad server, right? Maybe they're thinking, is the ad server right for them? Do they want to throw Pollen away? Right? Is it saying all that work they put in? Well, no, right? And in this new, API based world, API first world, you don't need to do that, right? Maybe you love GAM, you love the way GAM is operating at the moment, and would rather keep the GAM, the Google Ad Manager interface, because your team know how to use it. Well, is there a way you can have a platform that can integrate with GAM? Right. So there's those sorts of conversations I think go on a lot. And I think as retailers, especially technology first retailers or commerce platforms, and I would put things like the likes of Uber, etc. These are almost technology business first and foremost, right? So they're used to building things themselves. So often they approach the conversation, which, we've built these constituent parts, but we're missing these elements. Can you help us get us there quicker? And we've worked with partners in the past who've sort of said, can you help us provide a blueprint? Right, where in 3 years, 4 years' time, we might solely take this ourselves. That doesn't always play out like that. But yeah, there's definitely, I think, when you look at the ad server space today in commerce media, I think you see a lot of words like flexibility, modular, API first, exactly for that reason, right? Maybe I like this element and I'm not so sure about this element. And I think, not to do a disservice to some of those organizations you're mentioning before, you can't throw away the importance of demand generation, right? And I was at the Madfest, I think it's called the Madfest London event yesterday, which was pretty
Yesterday.
chaotic, I'll tell you, Steve. But the retail media was having a moment there. There was the Wednesday, I think it was Tesco Media were sponsoring a stage something digi ads, I think it was called their stage. Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion there about how to attract that incremental demand, how to bring demand in. So I think a lot of those more kind of legacy ad servers in certain markets have been able to be successful because they've been bringing demand in, which is what we used to do at Hook Logic, right? That's how we got into those conversations, because hey, we will bring incremental demand for you. Um, so I think that's often a challenge now. A challenge to any technology business is how can you work with your retailer, your partner, your platform, your commerce media platform, to help them solve some of their problems, right? And sometimes those are relevancy, but often those things are what can you do is to help drive additional incremental demand. So yeah, we can certainly get into that.
And how do you do that, Paul? Because it's certainly the case that retailers find it difficult to distinguish between certainly the two key players and even other challengers coming into the market in terms of ad serving. It's not to say that there aren't differences, but they can be at the margins and difficult to distinguish. Whereas bringing demand, you can't really argue with that. As you've explained, that was a key part of Hook Logic's success. And if you look at Criteo, that is certainly a key part of their success. They have a big team of folk that will bring ads to retailers. And, what's not to like about that? So how are you playing from a demand point of view, Paul? Do you have like big sales teams that bring in this demand, or how does that work?
I think it's a great question about how do you approach demand. I think it's also important to say that some of the other ad servers do not always have sales teams in every market. I think we have to be conscious that we might be looking through a kind of US UK lens here a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
fair point.
um, so I think where we think about demand is a little bit about, and perhaps I'm going to to cut to it. I think what we've realized is that this world is going to need to start to align more closely with the world of programmatic,
Yes.
right? How 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 it goes about that, I think, is the more interesting question. You and I, we ran an event. Well, I say you and I. You ran the event recently, and I was there, I was up on stage, which was good fun, right? And we were talking about how this industry needs to go where the buyers are. I don't know if you remember this. Some loose analogy I was making about surfing or something. God knows what it was about.
Yeah.
It was a midnight idea, but yeah, the concept was right. I think, which is we sort of are all busily building platforms, and these are great, right, for your kind of core audience. Um, but if you really want to be able to tap into media rather than simply retail media, what are the platforms that those media buyers are using? What do they prefer? How do they like to buy, right? What flexibility? So, I mean, we was nice speaking to Josh over at Mars recently, and he said, I can just turn on and turn off Snapchat, like that, right? Excuse the pun with the snap, but yeah, I mean, so that is retail media like that today. Sometimes, maybe not always, right? There's big commitments that kind of come up. So what we had a view here that if retail media is really going to go to the next level here, we're going to have to start, leaning into programmatic. So that was the concept. So we decided to test that theory out. So one document that I would recommend people taking a look at is, if you go to the website, you can see a major report which interviews over 100 media buyers across media agencies and brands themselves, and asked them about their buying of retail media. and then ask some certain questions around, would you be more inclined potentially to spend if you could buy via the platform of your choice? So the Trade Desk, DV360, Stack Adapt, Yahoo, the main DSPs really in their own seat. And the results were phenomenal. Right. It's like 96% of people said they would be very interested if they would be able to buy via those platforms. And that's got to be a bit of a wake up call. And the other thing I'd say on that is I'm a member of we're a member of the IB Europe. And the IB Europe do a kind of state of retail media attitudes, I think it's called, attitudes to retail media report. And it's very similar that each time, which is you and I have been, you're doing your podcast here, and I often think in retail media, there's certain like buzzword bingo that you can play, right? Which is standardization, mentation, measurement, right? Lack of standardization, fragmentation. So, do you remember I was talking before about my own career and about how I used to work at a sales house, right? So, in those days, the independent and auto trader didn't run their own digital sales teams. They would outsource this stuff to sales houses, right? And then sales houses would go out and represent publishers, and then you would have IO based buying, right, from or insertion orders, right, for we got pitched those to agencies. So agencies would be running all these
And
different IOs.
just to explain IOs, and yeah, it's a familiar term in ad tech world. It's not necessarily that familiar to retail media,
That's
but
fair. Okay, let's just say a paper insertion
yeah,
order,
it's like
right?
like a manual. You're describing like quite a manual
Exactly.
process. Yeah,
Exactly, exactly. They would say, okay, for the next month, I want to run, 20,000 with you on the independent. I'd like it to run between, this date and this date, right? And then you can imagine you've got someone in an agency with piles of paper in front of them, right? All their insertion orders, and they've got to go in and try and optimize them. It's all very, 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 very manual, right? Not only that, Steve, but each of these buys would maybe have different attribution methodologies. Some would say it's post click 30 days, post view 30 days, post view 60 days, and sometimes. So it was hard to be able to say this one seems to be performing better than that one, but then the attribution window is
yeah.
different.
Once you'd gone through the placing your order and writing it all down on a bit of paper and it had been inserted, I guess you're stuck at that point.
You
There'll
kind of
be
are.
many a time where you're thinking, "Oh shit, I wish I hadn't done this. It's not really working," and and
Well, that
and and you want to pull it. But equally, probably as many other times where you think, "Gosh, this is really working well. Why did I not place a much higher bet?" And the frustration of realizing you could have done so much more. Presumably, those were the kind of issues that you would encounter all the time.
It's exactly that. You might get those phone calls mid-campaign where you maybe get a small uplift because they've got some budget left over for it. But it was, highly, highly inefficient, right? And in the end, the agencies just had to reduce the number of partners they were working with because it was so inefficient, right? And then, I don't need to tell you where I'm going on this, right? Along came programmatic, and I think initially there was a bit of a bumpy ride. There was some elements that perhaps weren't perfect in terms of when programmatic first landed, but those lessons were learned, right? And, programmatic, okay, I mean, like what, 90% of all display is now bought programmatically. But I think what's more interesting, because people, can remember some of those difficult times at the beginning of display, instead thinking about, well, then programmatic was applied to native advertising, right? And does so, in other words, the less standard ad formats that were featuring on websites and apps. Then it was applied to audio. Then it was applied to out of home or digital out of home, and look at the success with connected TV. I mean, it's phenomenal. So I think what that's shown is that there's a real appetite for the buyers to be able to buy, and yet in retail media, it's still here are more and more different platforms. There was a guy at PepsiCo, Steve, who was on stage at NRF, who was talking about in North America, their teams have something like 50 different UIs that they have to access. and you're saying we're going to have to slim this down. So, what we're not saying is that, the likes of Pollen and Sphere in the UK are going to go away. There absolutely is going to be a place for those types of platforms, but also there's going to be another play, which is, I think Amir, hopefully he won't mind me quoting him on this one. So Amir Rasek over at Nectar, he said the way he sees the world eventually will be the democratization of retail media buying, right? However you want to buy my media, my data, that's your choice there, right? Um, so I think so the way we're thinking about it is in two ways, right? So where do people want to buy? Well, we think media buyers want to buy by programmatic. Hopefully, I've established that. Um, but what
And
do
just
they
to,
want to? Go
to
ahead,
say
Steve.
a couple of things, Paul, actually, that I think will be of interest to to our audience. That it's still the case that retail media spending in Europe, US falls into two buckets. You've got the trade commercial monies that a good retail media network can expand, and there's been a lot of uh, good work there. But ultimately, the retailer kind of knows that that is theirs to lose, and it's always going to be the case that a PepsiCo or a Unilever will always spend with any retailer, because not to do that will lose them share, and they've got the budgets to do that, and they've been doing that since time immemorial, and it's going to continue. And a lot of people, when they commentate on retail media, they don't really kind of quite understand that dynamic in my view. But there's then the secondary area of the marketing or discretionary ad monies, which again a lot of people only focus in on that bit. Now, for the retailers, this arguably is the critical bit, because there's a limit to how much the commercial income is going to grow. Whereas if you look at the media money spent, it's literally trillions. It's absolutely huge, and tiny slithers of that coming into retail is seriously big numbers. But to access it, you have to adapt to be able to receive it in the way that you're describing, because the people who are spending those monies, they don't really care that you're Sainsbury's or Tesco. What they care much more about is how many of the type of audience that they're being tasked with reaching in a specific window of time are going to be available to them at a certain price. And if you're not plugged into the tools that those buyers are going to be using, you're not going to get any money spent with you. It's almost as simple as that, as I see it, and and therefore you would expect to see retailers saying to themselves, okay, I do need to optimize my commercial income. And that also, by the way, behaves exactly as you've described with, they don't call it insertion orders, but that's exactly what it is. And big sales teams. It's not unusual in the UK to find retailers with over 100 people actively involved in the selling and the kind of the client
There's one
management.
I know in the US, Steve, that has 400.
Yeah, there you go. So very, very manual. Whereas you've got this programmatic world, which is basically machine led, and you've kind of got to be plugged in. Now, if you're plugged in, it doesn't mean that you're gonna sell your inventory, but you're kind of in the mix. If you're not plugged in, you're not in the mix. It's almost as simple as that. So it sounds to me as though what you've thought about is is almost, you're acting as the piping into that world, if I've understood that correctly. Is that right?
That's helpful context to well with it as well, with the difference between, I guess you'd say, in the US they might call it national budgets, right? And over here we might call it more marketing budgets. But I think those lines are blurring a little. But I take the point, right? Which is that the budgets that are generally flowing for other objectives, let's say, right? Yeah, and so I think we thought about it in two ways. Where are they buying? Well, undoubtedly, these the types of buyers you're trying to attract are buying via these platforms, right? Yahoo, Stack Adapt, and DV360, etc. The DSPs specifically. Um, but then, what are they buying? Right? And the elephant in the room, right, is that retail media is fantastic, and I hear about audio and digital screens in store, and I'm a huge fan of all these elements here, right? Especially the digital screens. I think that's really growing in prominence. But you only have to look at the numbers to realize that the vast majority is still sponsored products. Sponsored search is the main driver of global retail media revenue. I mean, we must be circa 80% of that. So the challenge then is, okay, if that's the core of retail media, then that's quite difficult to enable that to be bought in programmatic. Now you can enable that via search platforms, but those are not necessarily, well, they're not programmatic platforms, and they're not these DSPs. That's not the Trade Desk and DV360. Um, so what Koddi have developed is so I'll just take a step back, Steve, to explain the mechanics, right? So try not use too much technical language here as well, right? And you call me out if I start going into that. So when a retailer is on their website, let's say, someone has searched for water. So then the retailer starts to build the page, and they will say, okay, these are the top 100 products, and we're roughly ranking them in terms of the SKUs. So then what they would do usually is they would send those SKUs, those 100 SKUs, and it could be 100, it could be 500, whatever, right, to the ad server, right? And this is how it works today. The ad server then looks at those 100. So do any of those have ad budget against them? Say, okay, 10 of them do. Okay, run the auction, use a bit of intelligence, maybe who's winning or who's paying the most, etc. Okay, and
Yeah,
then return.
these something that's out of stock, potentially as
Yep,
well.
yep, yep. And then return those back to the retailer. And then the retailer would then say, okay, thank you. You've sent me five back and you've ranked them in terms of, who won where. And then we place them in the boxes that say featured, sponsored, something like that. That's how it works. So what our scenario is that, so you asked the question before about, can this work in with other with other platforms, right? With other vendors, right? So let's imagine the scenario again. So the retailer is about got their 100 products for water. They've sent those to their ad server. Said, hey, any of these got any ad budget against them? They then also send them to Koddi. Koddi at this point is operating like what you'd call an SSP. So that's a supply side platform. And this term is bandied around quite a lot, but in programmatic, it's essentially the pipes that are connecting it into these demand side platforms, these
Yeah,
DSPs that I talked about before. So
yeah,
we do the same kind of approach, right? So we take a look at them, but then we say, right, do any of these have active campaigns against them that are currently living via a solution called a deal ID, right? So we don't need to worry too much about that, but that's kind of a pre-agreed relationship between a buyer who's sitting on DV360, who, let's say they're a Nestle buyer. So if you imagine in their world, right, I'm going to use Asda as an example, but it's just an example. So I'm now Asda I'm now Nestle, right, at their media agency. And I go into my DSP. I can use a drop down box that says Asda. This is just an example, Asda. I can see Asda in there. And then I can see my 5 SKUs for Nestle that I've got, and I can see the request coming in, right, from Cody's SSP. And these two have got bids against them, these 2 SKUs. So they then are entered into the auction. And then when that flows back into the retailer now not only has the 5 products that were directly sold from their ad server, it now has these additional Nestle SKUs that are now coming in from a DSP. And they can choose to do what they want with that, right? They could say, okay, I want to prioritize my direct sold. So I'm going to work on a waterfall basis. And then if I've got space left over, then I'll take the Nestle from the DSP. Or I'll create what's called a unified auction and give everyone the same chance. Now, what's the benefit of this? So we understand the benefit for the buyer, right? So the buyer's like, great, this is in my platform. I know how to use it. I can set the attribution windows myself, right? All those kind of worries we have in retail media have eventually essentially been solved in many ways by programmatic already. But from the retailer's perspective, they now can either have increased fill rate, right? And this is a big question, Steve, that comes up all the time is like, what's your fill rate, right? We
Yeah.
hear 20, 30%, very common as like an average fill rate, right? There's clearly an opportunity there.
And,
Or
and,
is it
and,
a,
and
go
and
ahead,
just to
Steve.
explain that, what you I think are describing there is the percentage of customer shopping trips that during which an ad is shown, and the kind of expectation would be, well, surely that would be every trip, and and quite clearly it isn't. It's, as you say, it's much nearer 20 or 30%, and sorry, not the shopping trip as such, the search element of the shopping trip. Now clearly, um, if you're shopping for categories that are entirely own label, then there probably isn't anybody who wants to advertise. But um, nevertheless, 20 to 30% is a very, very low number, and therefore anything that would increase that has got to get the interest of the retailers.
I mean, I also want to caveat, right? 20 to 30% maybe for certain types of retailers, maybe that are working in grocery, etc. Some of the apparel retailers that have I'd say a smaller selection basis, they can see 70, 80%, right? So again, this is not necessarily for everyone, but there's different areas here that come into it, right? Because even if you've got a higher fill rate, you then get what's called increased auction density. To just solve what that means technically is, well, the more people you have in an auction, the likely they're going to bid against each other and get to a higher point. Therefore, your yield you're getting from an advertising is likely to increase. So there's even a benefit from that perspective. But to go back to the question about when you do see low fill rates, what might that be about, right? So we talk a lot about the head, the torso, and the tail, right? In terms of your advertiser set. So if I'm running a retail media network, and you said, Steve, before about 100 people, right, 100 team members, but even then, if you've got a selection, if you've got of 10,000, 20,000, 30, 100,000 different advertisers, and certainly in marketplaces that is the situation they have. How can you possibly be able to cover all of those off? Your mid-tail, the torso, and the long tail. So you just generally end up spending the time with the top advertisers. So therefore, it's no wonder if you're not servicing that lower end or middle even, that they are not appearing in against certain searches. So that again, we think this is a really smart way to be able to think about giving access to your inventory or your sponsored products via these kind of platforms.
Yeah. So I think what you're kind of saying is, look, retailers, there's going to be many, many occasions where you are not actually going to have anybody who's looking to bid, or you might only be one or two people, and they're not going to, the bids are not going to be that high. Therefore, allowing other brands who don't really mind whether their ad appears on an Asda site or a Tesco site or Google or anywhere else for that matter, but want to reach a certain number of people, within a certain time frame, allowing them to be shown is going to generate you income and or a high yield that is going to be incremental to what you would have had before. Is that the way of seeing
Let,
it?
let's think about my mate Jamie. So my mate Jamie runs a business called Love Corn. This is a plug for you, Jamie. Do you know Love Corn? You know when you go into the supermarket and it's always near the tills. It's a healthy, delicious snack. There you go. Anyway, so let's say that Jamie and his team at the agency are putting a plan together for Love Corn, right? And they're promoting a new flavor. What they're going to do, right? Let's build a campaign, right? They're going to think of maybe some connected TV. They're going to think maybe we might run some audio around certain times when people are snacking. So you've got a whole kind of like upper part of your funnel for your campaign. But wouldn't it be great, to your point, Steve, if I can then go, yeah, but how am I then going to drive sales? So in the same platform that I'm building my entire campaign, right? My upper funnel TV, my social media, even in that platform, right? Whatever it may be, right? And then I can go, oh yeah, and then it'd be great if I could also make sure that I'm at the top of the search in a bunch of my favorite retailers. Okay, who can I see in there? I can see Tesco, I can see as great. So set my bid, set my bid, set my bid. And then I've got a full campaign, right? As the Americans would say, soup to nuts, right? In one platform. So that's kind of what we're getting at, rather than thinking, oh, I've got this whole other bit, I need to get to a different team, a whole different organization. So it's just a way to pick up those kinds of revenue from those types of campaigns.
Yeah.
So the
No,
benefits
that
are
makes
clear to
sense.
me for the buyers.
Makes sense. Now we a week or so ago we were speaking to ISM, and ISM are bringing the same thinking to the world of install, the world of install radio, of now increasingly digital screens, and that is a world of insertion orders. I can tell you that, and very labor intensive to sell, been sold the same way for decades in many cases, and have created enabling technology to enable those to be bought programmatically in exactly the same way you've described. But they also announced, I think last week, a partnership with yourself. So can you walk us through how does that work, and does that mean that Koddi are playing a role on in-store programmatic potentially as well as on-site programmatic?
So you just need to think of this as an enabler, right? This supply side platform is an enabler that enables those buyers. That Love Corn example that I just saw, that I just described then. So as part of that, I could also then find my in-store element that's running on Asda, right? Again, this is just an example, and I can build that into my campaign in that same platform that we just discussed. So yeah, ISM's great partner. I love those guys. So yeah, it's that kind of connection piece. To say, okay, maybe it's audio, right? In-store audio, maybe it's in-store screens, or maybe it's on-site sponsored products or display or whatever it may be. But and then it's also really important to say, I think we need to get to this, Steve. So sometimes, like what I've been describing is what's called a private marketplace. I think we need to be really clear on this. So this is a pre-agreed relationship in the example of Asda between Asda and that Love Corn buyer. So this isn't about saying out to what's called an open exchange. Hey, we're all available. If anyone wants to bid and buy, display, whatever kind of advertiser you are, hey, you can now, run ads on my site, because I think the last thing anyone wants to have is, diet pills, gambling ads, not against gambling ads necessarily, but I think retailers are really protective of their environments. So this is about pre-agreed relationships. It's just making it easier for that Love Corn buyer to be able to go, oh, great, straightforward. There's my deal ID. Off I go, get the campaign done, with the reporting, billing managed at their end.
Yeah. Yeah, no, understood. Understood. And then just one question that, goes through my mind, and sure others may be asking. So people understand, I think, that you've got to be in it to win it. You've got to plug your inventory into the programmatic tools that the ad industry are currently using, and they probably can get their heads around that. That is going to take out the world of insertion orders and lots and lots of people over time within retail media, as exactly as it's happened elsewhere. But then, what can I do as a publisher, as a retailer, to influence the machines, if you like, to give me greater than fair share um, of the audience that the machine is looking to buy? Are there any sort of tips, tricks, techniques other than just just offer it at the lowest price you can that can help retailers to capture greater than fair share in the programmatic world?
Yeah, I think we have to remember that programmatic is simply a buying channel. we're at a point here where this isn't necessarily about, again, that open exchange buying where you become a commoditized solution. Um, this is about
This is
having a
about
strong
having a strong
strategic sales team
sales team
that
that
is not
is
focused
not focused
on,
on
there's a little bit of echo here, I think, Steve, but there we go. This is about having a strong strategic sales team that is, instead of being bogged down with operational aspects that we just discussed, is instead out in
out
market.
in market. Um,
Sorry, there's a bit of an echo, but anyway, I'll get past it.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I can't hear it.
yeah,
So.
So this is about, rather than being focused in on operational aspects, it frees up your sales team's time to be strategic, go out there, make the sales, but simply be able to say, hey, if you want to be able to buy this, you can buy via your channel of choice. So the best kind of analogy here is to think about the way that the connected TV guys are going out in market and selling. When Disney makes available some of their inventory via, or Hulu via programmatic channels, it's not because they're the cheapest, right? It's because they're Hulu. And I think that's the way of thinking about it.
Yeah,
It's just the likes of Tesco say you can buy us via Sphere, or you can buy via your channel of choice. But ultimately, people are buying Tesco because it's Tesco. The insights, the data, the performance you get, it's not because it's the cheapest in market.
yeah, makes sense. Okay, very, very good. So, yeah, thanks for explaining that. And what does the future hold for Koddi, Paul? Are you are you making progress? Tell us what your world's going to look like in 2 or 3 years' time.
I think I'm really excited about the future at Cody. I was very lucky to be at the Cannes event recently. It was actually my first trip there, and it was something. And anyway, what excited me was there were hotel chains that were building ad businesses. I was at a lunch with two different airlines that have built ad businesses. Um, and okay, those two examples in travel. I then saw uh, PayPal ads, hearing about what they're building. So I think the future is really bright for organizations that have that flexibility, and that kind of experience that can apply, um, who can help those businesses still maintain what makes them unique, right? And they with very, very different needs. So I think that excites me as more and more people enter into this space. Um, so yeah, very excited about the future.
Good. Well, really appreciate you coming on and helping us to understand that world of programmatic and how Koddi are coming into the retail media space. Very, very interesting. Um, Said with your normal enthusiasm, as we would expect from the retail media enthusiast. So,
I might have to change that. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to keep that, but anyway, seems to have
oh,
stuck
we
for the
love it.
minute.
We love it, Paul. Yeah, you've got to keep that. So, listen, yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you soon.
Good stuff. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, cheers, Paul.